Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. Liberals hate patriotism. They're so damn elitist. They also hate religion. They love activist judges. They live to tax and spend. Liberals are wimps, yet Americans are liberal. To tell us why all those liberal stereotypes are untrue, how they came to be believed as truth, and to tell us why Americans are indeed liberal, as well as offer an obituary for the newspaper, is Eric Alterman. Eric is a distinguished professor of English at Brooklyn College and a professor at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. He's a columnist for The Nation and a senior fellow and columnist at the Center for American Progress. Professor Alterman has authored 7 books, including bestsellers and award winners. His newest book is Why We're Liberals, a political handbook for post-Bush America. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you.
We're liberals?
Yeah, sure.
Explain how we're liberals.
Well, it's true that only 20% or so of Americans call themselves liberal. But if you look at issue after issue after issue after issue after issue, it's not just that a majority hold liberal views, the liberal view, as it's defined in our debate. It's supermajorities. It's 65% in most of these cases. What
makes a liberal? What are the positions? What are the test issues that define one as liberal or conservative?
You know, again, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. They're in the book.
Sure.
But something like 65% of Americans think that that wealthy people should be taxed more, that the government should provide universal health care, a place to live for people. They think that the government should stay out of issues of choice with regard to reproductive freedom. They don't think they're willing to have kids taught sex education rather than abstinence education, which even at the risk of possibly encouraging sex. But those are the social issues. On economic issues, on things like stem cell research, scientific knowledge, on environmental issues, they're very liberal. They even say they're willing, 60% say they're willing to pay higher taxes on that. And on foreign policy, George Bush has made most of the country into liberal.
Yeah, and in fact, you offer a wealth of data that show, at least from a survey research point of view, and looking at good surveys. I mean, legitimate, Pew.
Over time, and it's not, you can actually use good surveys to make any point you want. But the way you know someone's being honest with their survey research is if they look at the same question over a period of time.
Right,
and that's what I've tried to do.
And, okay, so the American population, supermajorities as you describe it, hold the liberal position on a broad panoply of issues, but only 20% self-identify. Why then the existence of these stereotypes that I articulated up top, but also even more of them in this book? Why has this all stuck?
Well, it's stuck for a few reasons. One of them is that a lot of this used to be true about liberals. In other words, liberals made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, you're pretty hard on liberals, too.
Yeah. They're just out of date. Second reason it's stuck is that the conservatives have spent hundreds of millions of dollars attacking liberals, debasing liberals, trying to make all these horrible associations with the name of liberal, and the media has basically swallowed this.
And some elements of the media have actually, forced it and pushed it. For example, I mean, your discussion of Fox is...
Oh, sure. But, I mean, there's a conservative side of the media, and then there's a mainstream side, the side that's often called liberal. But actually, the liberal side has often just passed along unthinkingly.
Which you do. I mean, I had to take my blood pressure medicine several times reading this.
Yeah, a lot of... And liberals, actually, there's a sort of Stockholm syndrome on the part of liberals.
Interesting.
And many of them have internalized some of these stereotypes, and only recently have they begun to fight back. This book is, I hope, part of this whole effort of fighting back. The New York Times called it intellectual vitamins for
Yeah, and it did, and in fact, I mean, you got a quite favorable review here.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that quite favorable.
Well, I mean,
I would call that rather unfavorable.
Well, I thought it was favorable insofar as the analysis. What I think the reviewer takes issue with is that he wanted more. In other words, he argued with your secondary title, a political handbook.
Yeah,
I thought it was good analysis, but he wanted you to take him to the promised land, and that's
Yeah, well, I would have liked to have taken him, but unfortunately, I'm not the right guy for that.
Are there right guys for this?
Well, I don't know. I'm not comfortable predicting the future, and I'm also not that interested in policy. I'm much more interested in culture and how the culture determines our politics. So I didn't want to spell out what is the best healthcare policy, what is the best trade policy.
Right.
I don't feel comfortable doing that.
No. But what is it that resuscitates the word liberal and
I think it's very simple.
Go ahead.
It's just a refusal to take it lying down. It's to say, as John Kennedy said in 1960 when he was running for president to the New York Liberal Party, if by liberal you mean all these terrible things, then of course we are not liberal. But if by liberal you mean, and then he gave a very clear, concise, powerful definition of liberalism, then I'm proud to say I'm a liberal. And liberals need to say they're proud to say they're liberals.
I don't hear too many of them. I don't hear any of them.
Well, you hear me.
Well, excuse me. Yeah, you running for president? Have you run for president?
No.
Do you want to run for president?
No, I don't want to start talking about all my sexual activity.
That's right.
But
and your drug. No, I'm sorry.
But I don't. No serious presidential candidate has called himself or herself a liberal since John Kennedy did in 1960.
Why is the word important? Why resuscitate the word?
Well, I'll tell you why. Because look, 20% are liberals, but that's the 20% who vote in Democratic primaries. Those 20, that's who make up the voters, because very few people actually vote in Democratic or Republican primaries. And so you can't, someone who wants to be president can't condemn liberals if they're a Democrat. But they can't embrace liberals either, because if they get tagged with the label, they're considered to be radioactive by so much of the media. So they end up trying to avoid the question, hemming and hawing, saying, oh, I don't believe in labels. And they look like wimps. They look like people who can't give a straight answer. And Americans, I think, care a lot less about what you believe than that you believe it and that you're willing to stand up for it. And if you look at John Kerry, nobody knew what he actually believed about anything. And that was why George Bush won the election.
And that may be the reason why John McCain might win the election?
It may be. All the media love John McCain. That's the other reason. And they're not going to hold him responsible for the past 8 years of catastrophic leadership that his party has delivered us.
So he gets a pass?
I'm afraid that's what will happen. Again, I don't predict the future.
How do liberals prevent that from happening? If this is a watershed election that we're really talking about, a post-Bush America, does John McCain represent a post-Bush America?
Well, you could say that he does. Should he transform the Republican Party into something other than it's been for the past 8 years? But he doesn't give any impression of wanting to do that. There's a few issues he cares about, and he's going to change policy on those. And on the rest of them, he's just going to sort of let the hacks have it. And so those things, which are actually, a lot of them are very important to the country, are going to be run by the same people who've been screwing up the country for 8 years.
Are Obama and Clinton liberals?
Obama is, but he doesn't like to call himself one.
And what makes him liberal and Clinton not? I'm trying to get at what this word really means. You know, its associations, its resonances.
Yeah, well, the word itself has two meanings. Its initial meaning, the classical liberal, is just someone who embraces the legacy of the Enlightenment. And so that would include not only Obama and Ted Kennedy, but also, and Hillary Clinton, but also Milton Friedman and Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Because these are people who say, we do what we think is right. We do what we believe is supportive of human freedom. We don't do what God tells us. We don't do what the fatherland tells us. We don't do what the dictatorship of the proletariat tells us. It doesn't include George Bush. And it doesn't obviously include the leaders of Iraq.
And it doesn't include George Bush. Why?
Because George Bush does do what he thinks God tells him to. He thinks that there is a higher law than reason.
Okay.
And the entire Christian right doesn't include them either. They're a regressive force as far as liberalism goes. Now, that's not all that meaningful, because if you're including Friedman and Reagan and Thatcher, what have you got?
Right.
Yeah. So you have to look to the transformation of the term in the 1920s and 30s, led by, I'd say, the philosopher John Dewey and President Franklin Roosevelt. Right. And what they said is, we hold these, we believe very dearly in these values, but we have to make them meaningful in pragmatic ways. Because if you look around yourself, people don't have the ability to follow their dreams, to have equal opportunity to try and be whatever they want to be, because there are all kinds of forces in society that are preventing that. And we need to create structures in society, government structures, labor union structures, other forms, to protect people, to give them a fair shake. We need to join together as a society to do those things, because the market will not do it for people. So you got the New Deal, and then the New Deal got continually expanded, and it grew in many ways through under Lyndon Johnson into doing things that government ought not be doing.
Okay, so in the 60s, the liberals, in a sense, went off the track, and then there's a real, as you point out here, there's a real self-destructive element in liberal behavior. Describe that. What are the elements of this self-destruction?
Well, I think liberals knew that they were right about ending racial discrimination and later gender discrimination, and it was the right thing to do, but they didn't think very hard about how to do it effectively. They confused intentions with results, and so they thought because they had the side of morality on their side, they didn't have to worry about the people who were going to be victims of this transformation, and so they ended up attacking their own most important constituency, which was the white working class.
And they still have a problem electorally with the white working class, because if they don't win the white working class in this election, they're going to lose it.
Right, and that's a legacy of I mean, I think they're a lot nicer to the white working class than the Republicans are, although not so much rhetorically, but in reality, which is actually the case in a lot of these things.
Yeah, the disjuncture between... Go ahead.
But they sort of gave their enemies a sword, and with the way they mistreated the white working class, every time they had a complaint, they would call them racists or whatever, you know. They created these resentments that the right has spent hundreds of millions of dollars stoking, and the media, the talk show hosts and so forth. And what they've created is a box that they have trouble getting out of, even though it doesn't have much relationship to reality today. The mindset is powerful enough that it's more powerful.
The rhetoric, in fact, is the reality.
Yeah, right.
Okay, now, so you've got a world out there in 2008. What would a liberal president do coming into office in January 2009?
Well, the first thing a liberal president would do would be to try and restore what Thomas Jefferson called the good opinion of mankind. They would not say, to hell with you, the rest of the world, we're right and you're wrong because we're on God's side. They would look around themselves and say, you know, what can we learn from our friends about it that has caused this situation? They would accept reality, you know, and that would include doing it. I mean, the best thing they could do is try and, you know, if Obama were president, the first thing I would advise him to do would be to see if we could get some cooperation with NATO in Iraq. See if we could bring other people saying, we screwed up, it's a catastrophe, we can't fix it by ourselves, we need your help, would you help us out? And even if it weren't successful, the humbleness of it would be effective.
We don't do humble well, though.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, you know,
okay.
look where it's gotten us.
No.
And then the other things a liberal president would do are actually these things that are supported by 65% of the American people. He would institute a much stronger environmental protection. He would do universal health care. He would have a scientific research program that was consistent with science as opposed to fundamentalist religion. And he would focus his attention on our actual enemies rather than the enemies we're inventing for ourselves.
And you believe that this is at least conceivable, if not plausible?
Well, it depends.
Now we're getting to the optimism, pessimism.
Well, here's the thing. As I said, 65% or so of people support that agenda. Mm-hmm. But the other percent, or the percent that makes a lot of noise, and they make for good media coverage. I mean, this was true in Clinton. You know, when Clinton was impeached, The day he was impeached, he had an approval rating of 68%.
And as the impeachment proceedings went on, they either held steady or got better.
No, that's what I mean. On the day the impeachment vote took place, 68% approval rating, more than twice what George Bush has. But the media didn't care. The media were on the side of the Republicans by and large. So Americans and liberals need to do a better job of holding the media accountable so that they actually reflect what people believe.
And one of the major points of the book is the reality, and as you put it, of the biases against liberals among the media, irrespective of the obviously right-wing media, the Wall Street Journal.
Right, no,
Fox.
the opinion media. The opinion media in this country is biased against liberals. Even liberals in the opinion media.
Why? What is it that leads even presumptive liberals to buy into the stereotypes and beat up?
Some of the liberals in the media who are considered liberals are not really liberals.
Okay.
Like Time magazine hasn't really had a liberal for a very long time.
If Joe Klein's the liberal, then...
Yeah. I mean, they've now started to hire a bunch of people, but the first person they hired was William Crystal. They didn't think that they were conservative enough before he went to the New York Times. The New York Times has a couple of really good liberals, actually three. Frank Rich, Paul Krugman, who didn't start out as liberal. Bush made him into a liberal. And Bob Herbert are all liberals.
But he was a liberal hawk, Krugman.
I guess so. I don't actually remember that.
Yeah.
But, Nick Kristof considers himself a liberal, but attacks liberals all the time for sort of to demonstrate his credibility. This is part of the Stockholm Syndrome that I'm talking about. And he attacks them in ways that are not credible. He attacks them on the basis of mental telepathy. He says liberals actually believe, without any evidence at all. Tom Friedman does this all the time, although he wouldn't call himself liberal. Most people consider to be Maureen Dowd a liberal, and in fact, I got an email from Clark Hoyt saying, yes, he considers her to be a liberal, the Times public editor. And she just is always attacking liberals in the most venal and unsupported ways. So the liberals, the quote-unquote liberals in the media are in many ways liberals' own worst enemies.
And so if we're all liberals, where are we?
Well, we have a dysfunctional political system.
Explain how that translates.
Well, it's complicated. Some of these things are nobody's fault but God's. It's to the degree that there's a God. I mean, some of them are liberals' own faults. We talked a little bit about that. Some of them are conservatives having snowed the media with propaganda that the media repeats endlessly. And
you talk about not only the right media, but the think tanks, etc.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that liberals are anti-military, that's just false. They're much nicer to the military than conservatives. That they're activist judges. Actually, Republicans appoint far more activist judges than Democrats. That they're profligate with government. Well, actually, George Bush has increased the size of the government more than any liberal.
This is one of the reasons why I took the blood pressure medicine. As I'm into page 200 and 250, as my head's starting to swell. Go ahead.
But and I got, the book is filled with that. That's kind of what the book is about, to give you sort of the evidence on these things. But there's some things that you can't really blame them for. One problem liberals have is that they live too close together. They like to live in cool places, like this city of mine.
So you want to spread them out so the electoral vote is different? But more New Yorkers.
I wish God had spread them out. But if we lived in Wyoming or Alaska,
but you wouldn't want to live.
No, I don't want to live in those places, and that's the problem. Conservatives don't like even each other, and they live really far apart from one another.
Oh, okay.
And so they have a lot more electoral power.
This has got a sociological basis in the evidence. Here.
Well, I
just want to make sure that we're not, preaching.
I don't know why they don't want to live next to each other, but they don't. And so conservatives spread themselves out in these underpopulated states, and they carry a lot more weight electorally. So, for instance, in 1994, when the Congress flipped, it was considered a right-wing revolution, and they were charging elephants on Time magazine. In 2006, it flipped back, moved to the center. No elephants charging anywhere. In 2006, more people flipped than in 1994. And in 2006, more people voted Democratic as a percentage of the voting population, or the people who voted, than in 1994. So the flip was actually much larger in 2006 than in 1994. But in 1994, the Republicans got more seats, and more seats changed hands, because more seats were dominated by their spread out votes than ours. Ours
Right.
are all focused in here in New York and big cities everywhere and college towns, and everybody lives all close together, and so we waste all these votes.
Don't tell me that our main policy recommendation coming out of this is move to North and South Dakota.
Exactly.
You
heard what I said. I
Manhattan.
said this is God's fault.
Okay.
And this is
So
not anything
okay.
we can do anything
Okay.
about.
So you've got these, if you will, structural problems that liberals are dealing with. Some self-inflicted wounds. How do they get? I want to know how they get the high ground. How do liberals become the dominant voice?
They stop apologizing. They assert that we have this incredibly proud historic tradition that built this country and won 2 world
and
wars.
they can, and you're convinced that they can convince the American people if they make the effort.
Well, and
given
then the second part,
right?
part is that they have the majority positions on everything. So it's just a matter that the American people haven't trusted them in the past. Now, it just so happens that we have the most incompetent presidential leadership we've ever had in this country, and it's opened up a window for people to hear liberals tell the truth.
But the liberals are ripping each other apart on the way to Denver, it seems.
Well, this too shall pass. I mean, I'm not happy about that, but it'll be over.
You mean the primary will be over? The general election's over?
The primary will be over.
We don't want the
general election is a long way off.
World to be McCain.
The November is a long way off. I don't like this any better than anyone, but to make any predictions on the basis of now for November is silly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. In addition to this book, in the last couple of weeks, in fact, in the March 31st, 2008 issue of The New Yorker, you wrote an obituary for the newspaper. Is the newspaper dead or at least comatose? And relate that to the larger issues of politics that we've been talking about earlier.
Some people are calling it an obituary. I'm not sure I would call it that. I actually wrote that piece because I've always been interested. I've written lots of books that deal with this. I've always been interested in a debate between John Dewey and Walter Lippmann.
Yeah, it was an interesting philosophical
in the 1920s about what is democracy, and I thought that the internet was creating the return of John Dewey.
Meaning
that democracy was becoming more about conversation and less about information. And that's what the internet provides.
I think that in many ways that's exactly right, and that's what the internet revolution is, and we haven't quite understood it yet. I think Obama gets it from a campaign point of view. Talk about that a little bit more.
Well, Walter Lippmann and John Dewey had this debate in the 1920s. Lippmann basically gave up on democracy because he said people couldn't get in good information and they couldn't be bothered if they could get it.
Right.
And so they might as well just let the elites run things for them because those people could get the information and actually wanted to. And that would be fine with most people because who cares? As long as you get results.
Right. I mean, the system is stable, with fewer people running the place.
And Dewey, actually, nobody has ever really debated what Lippmann said about the quality of democracy. Every philosopher will admit that democracy basically stinks in terms of accuracy. But Dewey said...
Accuracy meaning what?
The accuracy of the information that filters down to real people. So it is rather easy to fool all of the people all of the time if you fool them in different ways each time. And Dewey said, but that's not what's important. What's important is that people's values are reflected and because once you become part of an elite, you have different values than the people who sent you.
Right.
Dewey said something like, you can be the greatest shoemaker in the world, but only the guy wearing the shoes can tell you where it hurts.
Right.
So he said we needed to involve people and give them the ability to have conversations so that they could express their values and have those values be reflected, regardless of whether or not they were experts. And but there was no way to actually do that because people were too busy, and they got more busy as time went on, and our democracy became smaller and smaller. Fewer and fewer people voted, and the news media didn't really facilitate it. The news media was much more interested in telling you what you needed to know.
Right.
And the news media became part of the elite, just as Lippmann predicted. So what the internet is a kind of revolt against that. The first revolt against it took place on the right. The right-wing media was also a revolt against it.
Right. I mean, you talk about talk radio, the use of old media in new ways. Go ahead.
Right. They didn't like the way the civil rights movement was covered, and they didn't like the way Barry Goldwater's 1964 presidential campaign was covered. And they had a lot of money, so they built their own media to try to bypass the elite media. And the liberals felt like the elite media was on their side. And then, beginning with Clinton's impeachment and then the Florida election debacle, they decided finally, and of course my classic work, What Liberal Media, They decided that that wasn't the case, and that they needed to fight this battle themselves. And this coincided with the advent of internet technology, which allowed them to do it.
Right.
So the blogosphere does two things for liberals. It allows them to have conversations outside of the mainstream media, and it allows them to critique the mainstream and hold it accountable and correct it. And these two things, combined with a lot of economic factors that have nothing to do with the internet, are killing newspapers. Most newspapers, not all newspapers, but most newspapers. The New York Times will survive somehow, in some form, as will the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. But a lot of newspapers won't. And the New York Times will not serve. The New York Times right now has, even with the new buyouts they announced a few weeks ago, they've got 1,250 or so newsroom employees. I don't think they can support even half that number, because internet advertising pays about 1/20th of what.
And the big story of the last couple of weeks has been the declining profitability of all the media.
Yeah.
So you've got this revolution happening. Which of the candidates, we've got about a minute and a half, which of the candidates seems to understand this dynamic, and what does that mean for 2009 post-Bush liberal America?
I'm not going there.
You're not going there?
No, I'm not making these predictions.
No, well, it's not a prediction. Which one of the candidates, do you get a sense that they have a sense of the nature of this revolution?
Obama is raising, $50 million a month, mostly from small donors. He has far more small donors than Hillary or McCain. And that's one great thing about the Internet for Democracy, which is that for the first time in history, the right, the side of capital, is not better funded than the side of the people.
So, in conclusion, in a sense, the rise of the Internet provides the liberals the means to create these communities.
The rise of the Internet is by and large a boon for democracy in every way, and money is a very important form our democracy takes, and it's been great for that. It's not great for everything, but by and large, it's an incredibly useful democratic tool.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.